So with patch 14.8b coming to a close, that doesn't mean that there isn't time left to still talk about the meta, think about the meta, how to still utilize and approach the meta for garnering LP. Since the last time we have spoken, today we will be doing a mid-patch analysis, talking about what trends have changed, what compositions have changed, have any new comps have come up onto the horizon, and also just how have the pros adjusted to the whole 4-cost soup meta that's been going on right now. But first off, before we even start talking about that, real quick, just a little bit of housekeeping in case you don't know already. We were very fortunately enough to be one of the Riot affiliated co-streams for the Tactician's Cup. We have been co-streaming day 1 and day 3. Today is day 3 at the time of recording this video. We got a bunch of really cool people coming by. We've had Raptor on, we've had Clement Chu, you know who he is off of TFT Twitter, very cool dude, posts a lot of really interesting Chinese tech. We've had people like Yoga from our study group, we have people like Sub-Zero Arc, who's also going to be there as well. I believe he's going to be there today. He wasn't here yesterday, but he'll be here today. We're also doing a lot of challenges as well on the stream as well, so just trying to filling out this bingo card. There's a lot of rewards for the content creators, and so I would really appreciate your support during these co-streams. They've been really fun, and overall I think it's a really nice little breath of fresh air, just because I think a lot of people, I think most people, at least in the North American community, everybody like watches Frodan's co-stream, and nothing wrong with co-streams, or nothing wrong with Frodan's co-stream at all. I think he does a fantastic job. But if you want a little bit of a fresh air, you want different takes, or if you want, you know, different personalities to be browsing through, I highly recommend just coming by the co-stream and just checking it out. And Riot also gave us some egg codes to give away, so I think we're giving away the last 10 that we have left over. I think we've given out 20 already, so that's gonna be really fun. But anyways, let's talk about the mid-patch analysis. So first off, reroll in general is basically dead. We've seen some people try to be a little more lenient and open to the idea of playing reroll, but when it comes to the reroll lines, which is really just Gnar, to be completely honest, it's not good. The success rate has been pretty low, and the biggest reason is because of tempo. Now, what do I mean by this is basically, at least what we've seen throughout the Tactician's Cup, what happens is if the player is not able to hit their units, and what I mean by units, I mean by 3-star units within reasonable tempo, and I actually mean like reasonable is actually a little accelerated actually at the pro level. Basically, the idea is that you want Gnar 2, Kindred 2 if you're playing Gnar line by 3-2, and then you want the 3-star versions by 4-2, and then you want to still have enough money to be able to push levels. So a lot of things need to go right. So Gnar Kindred is definitely not something you're seeing very often. Actually, surprisingly enough, and it's somebody that I completely forgot to have included as well. But the Zoe Zyra, or the Janna Zyra Zoe comp, I believe is like, I think it's nicknamed the Powerpuff Girls comp. I'm not entirely sure why. It might be an all-female comp, I'm not entirely sure. But this comp has actually been on the rise a little bit. We're seeing more and more people being more open to the idea of playing Janna, but it does require a very good spot for it. Again, you have to hit reasonably within tempo, and it's not like these reroll comps can't succeed, but to hit within reasonable tempo is very unlikely. So the risk is really great, because if you hit too late out of tempo, then you are not going to be having a good time. Most of the time, as we've seen with players like, even like Weijin Iverson, one of the best players in North America, just go 8th, like the fastest 8th of their life, because they just weren't able to hit within tempo, and then actually they can hit some really low roll points, and then it just gets even worse. Low rolling 4-cost versus low rolling reroll, typically low rolling 4-cost at the pro level is less damaging and less severe compared to low rolling on reroll lines, because if you low roll the reroll lines, you're just dead. But anyways, one last thing to note, I think Shen and Senna are actually a little underrated in the current meta. I have definitely played this comp even at like the highest level of play, and even in the highest level of play, I went 5th with it, which you might go like 5th, well that's not good. Well, the thing is that this is 5th in like a very high challenger lobby. Everybody's playing very strong boards. There's like a 6 porcelain board, there's like a legendary cat board, there's like a 3-star 4-cost board. There's a lot of crap going on in that lobby, and the fact that that board could even go 5th in that lobby, I think is still really remarkable. And actually, it's kind of similar to like, I don't know if any of you play chess, but it's kind of like similar to like the London system, where it's really good for like beginners and like people who are maybe in a bit lower elo, but I say lower as in like masters and below probably. You can still find probably a lot of success with Shenna. It's just a very easy to pilot comp. It's very strong if you're Ink Shadow strong, things like bombardment, things like protection, and I still think overall it's still a very underplayed comp, and I think people don't respect it as much as they could be. But again, reroll is just sort of in this weird state right now because of the way that 4-costs are playing. But again, if you're in a bit lower elo, you know, just below challenger, below GM, I would actually recommend playing Shenna and adding it to your repertoire, because if you're just climbing for LP, I actually think it's really nice, and also it's very uncontested. Moving on, talking about the Sannin, the big 3. That's a bit of a Naruto reference for you guys, but the big 3, since the last time we've spoken, have still been incredibly prevalent throughout the Tactician's Cup, as we've seen 4 costs and just 4-cost soup boards, and flexing around 4 costs has been the name of the game. The first one is Kain. Nothing much has changed about it. In fact, I don't think anything at all has changed about it. I think people are a little more in agreement as to what the true bits of Kain and Lee Sin are, which I'll just quickly go over. But for Kain, it's Hodge, Last Whisper, GA, Lee Sin being BT, Sterax, and Titans. And then for Wukong, by the way, because the Wukong one is still really solid, blue buff, GA, and BT is probably the ideal itemization you're looking for. And basically the idea is that once you hit level 8, you just roll and you're looking for your upgrades. You're looking for Kain 2, Lee Sin 2, Wukong 1. These are the really big ones. You drop out of you actually drop the Soraka if you can. This one has Soraka in the board only because 7 Heavenly is really strong. But if you don't actually hit the Soraka, or rather you don't hit the Heavenly emblem, instead what you can do is you can actually tech down out of Soraka and you actually play Sages instead, and that way you get more Omnivamp for your front line, and that is a really big upgrade. It's a really big buff, to be honest. Basically you see a lot of players, if they don't have the Heavenly spot, just Diana instead of Wukong, and then sometimes I've seen 3 Sage with Zyra as well. It's very rare. It's if you're missing on the Heavenly units, but overall this board is still really solid. I will say though, it is still very overplayed. I still don't like this line in general because of how saturated the line is, and actually what we're seeing at the Tactician's Cup is that the line is still being overplayed to the point where the board isn't doing too hot, because you still have 2 to 3 people trying to play the line, but it can really only support 1, and even if it supports 1, the cap is slightly lower compared to the other 4-cost meta lines. So even the person who does really well with it, unless they super high roll, their spots usually looking like a 3rd for the most part. So I know Subzero Arc hates this comp. He thinks this comp's B tier. That's such a fucking lie, but it's still very good. It's just overplayed, and that's just the biggest problem with it. But moving on, for Invokers, Ash, this is again still, we talked about this in the last patch, it's still really prevalent in the current meta. It's actually less prevalent, and things have slightly changed about the line. The biggest thing is that I think people are really starting to deviate away from Lilia carry in general. Not that Lilia is bad by any means, but it's just that other units do her job better, meaning that Ash is a better DPS carry. Lissandra, who is honestly just such the biggest highlight of this patch, is the most broken 5-cost. The thing about Lissandra is that people are starting to realize that you really do like itemizing her. So things instead of your Shojin or your adaptive, honestly you might as well just throw it onto Lissandra instead and just call it a day. It's actually probably much better off. So by atomizing your Lissandra, you're able to cap a lot higher as well, because she's more likely to farm your components, and then people cap out that way instead. And I think most of the time Lily actually ends up becoming a trait bot, if anything else. Annie is still your main tank for the main line. It's not that much different. For Invokers also, because you're not really playing around Lilia anymore, you can actually start thinking about deviating away from 4 Invokers in general. You can even drop the Lilia as well and start playing around legendaries instead. I do think that's still the main line, but again, if you hit a Lilia 2, you play the Ash line, it's totally acceptable, it's totally fine. But I am saying again, people are deviating slightly away from this main line and creating their own variations of legendary soup once they stabilize on 8, utilizing this level of a core. But moving on in the final of the big 3, again, it is Kaisa as well. Nothing much has really changed, although the one thing that we've seen at the pro scene is that I think people are a little more open to the idea of itemizing Sylas in this line, but also they're not really leaning this line unless they have some level of a Fortune opener. So Fortune from 2-1 into Trick Shot seems to be the main line for Trick Shots in general, just because when you're playing Fortune and you're playing Trick Shots, the units all share very similar units. So it's very easy to just tech into Trick Shots once you've cash out of Fortune. And by using Fortune in order to buff the ceiling of your board, right, the strength that your board can hit, now we are seeing people are able to play Kaisa and still do very well with it, because they were able to get a little bit of that, a little bit of the juice, if they will. I apologize for my phone keeping it just keeps going off. I'm gonna mute it just for a second here. But I am moving out of this apartment. That's why the apartment seems so empty. So I think my mother is texting me and a bunch of stuff, who I will respond to right after this video. But finally, let's talk about Sylas. Sylas is the big one. Sylas is the new comp that people have been playing around. Raptor was the first one to, I believe Raptor was the first one to really talk about it. At least, I talk to Raptor very often. So I actually think I definitely heard it from him first. That's for sure. Bro's Yaptor for a reason. But he definitely talked about the strength of Sylas and how Sylas is really strong. People are sleeping on this unit, but clearly not anymore. If you've been watching the cup with us, you noticed that Sylas has popped up on basically every board, whether you're playing Trick Shots, but more importantly, if you're just playing Sylas carry with Sages. The reason why this board is really nice is because, first off, Sylas' itemization is super flexible. You have Adaptive, Rabadon, Spark, Crown Guard, BT, Gunblade. archangels. Like, you can put a lot of stuff on him, and he actually succeeds very, very well with all of these items. Galio as well is just a unit in terms of 4 cost quality, just a little not that great. It's definitely less popular compared to the other 4 cost main tanks, especially compared to Annie and Ornn and what's the last one? Nautilus, right? So quite honestly, it's very easy to find the Galio. It's not too difficult. Maybe not anymore since the meta has shifted, but it's still super solid. And Morgana, nobody likes playing around Morgana. It's usually just a trait bot, so it's not too hard to find Morganas either. So the line itself has not been that contested, except for outside of the main carry being Sylas. But overall, the line itself is very, very nice and actually very flexible. 4 Bruiser is the main core, but outside of 4 Bruiser, let's just drop the Rakan and the Wukong. You actually have a +1 on level 8. So whether you find Rakan or Wukong, that's nice. But you have different ways of capping out as well. You could do another stage. You could do Diana, do 3 stages instead. You could drop out of this maybe a heavenly unit instead. Doesn't really matter, like a little bit of that extra AP. You have a lot of different ways of flexing around that 8th slot, and then if you hit any of the 5 costs, you can just throw these in instead, and your level 9 board looks something like this. You can even itemize Wukong as well for a secondary or even tertiary carry. I think people have been itemizing Morgana as well, just for that little bit of extra like bonus backline damage. She's not great by any means as a primary carry, and I don't think she will be unless they really do some drastic changes to her. But regardless, she's still very, very good as a secondary, just still dishes out like respectable amounts of damage, especially if you itemize her with things like adaptive and archangel, so that she's eventually able to ramp up and deal bonus damage. Again, very solid comp. I would really recommend playing this, and if you want more information on it, Froden actually did a fantastic job covering the line itself, so I would highly recommend checking this out if you're still a little confused as to how to play the line. But I will link his video in the description below so you guys can go check it out, because again, I think he did a fantastic job covering the line. But no one is playing this. That's fake news. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about 4 cost flex in general and just how to actually play around 4 cost flex. I know we covered it a little bit briefly in the last meta analysis, but I think it's important to discuss exactly how people are flexing and how their ability to flex is probably better than yours. Respectfully. But let's talk about it, because first off, when you think about 4 cost flex, you need to first prioritize unit quality over the unit star level. And what I mean by that is that on your roll down, obviously you want to just pick up whatever you can find that is of decent quality. But what do I mean by quality, right? Well, in general, when it comes to unit quality, it derives from 2 things. First, it's your itemization. Have you been itemizing for a melee AD carry this whole time? Have you been itemizing for an AP melee carry this whole time? Have you been itemizing for an AP backliner? Have you been itemizing for an AD backliner, right? How do your item slams steer you into a direction, steer you into these 4 costs that you need to be playing around, right? That is the first one. So units that can use your items in a very good manner, in a quality manner, right? That is number 1. But number 2 is if the unit itself is strong. So for example, Ash, units like Sylas, units like Annie in a vacuum, these are probably some of the strongest 4 costs that are great, despite the fact, like not thinking about their traits, but just by themselves in a vacuum, right? I feel like I repeat myself sometimes. It is what it is. But you get the idea, right? Sylas, Ash, Annie, Kain, Nautilus. These are really S tier in terms of their unit quality. They are very, very strong in a vacuum. You can even sometimes throw them in as a threat, which is as a reference back to like set 8 threats. Which, by the way, we should bring those back. I really like threats. But really strong units that you can almost always put a 2-star version on your board, and you're going to have a good time with it. You can even itemize as a threat, and it's fine. Lilia, Kaisa, Ornn, and Lee Sin, these are not as good. I would put these as like A-tier units in terms of unit quality. They're still very solid, but sometimes they need a little bit more, usually their traits, to really get them going. And even then, they're not like the star of any comps. Kaisa obviously is the Kaisa comp, but even then, it's like, there's Kaisa, but there's Zaya, But anyways, lastly, Morgana, Syndra, Galio, these are not units you really want to be thinking about as threats. It's really hard to even justify 2-starring them on your roll down if you don't have anything else 2-starred. So just keep that in mind. You maybe utilize them as trait bots, but overall they're not really that great. So why does this matter, right? Well, let's talk about it. Let's say, for example, that you're doing your roll down on 4-2, okay? And let's just look at back at this. Let's just take Sylas and Ash, right? Sylas and Ash. These are the first the two really strong comps. If you hit a Sylas 2 and an Ash 2, you should probably be thinking to yourself, okay, good. This is my board on 4-2. How do I play it, right? That's the big thing. You should have a general idea as to how to flex into these boards and how to actually garner value out of these units, right? So let's talk about it. So first off, in this example, what does Ash need to succeed? Well, Ash needs snipers and she needs porcelain, right? So with porcelain, you have two options. Usually it's either the Mumu for a little bit of that extra frontline, or it can be Lysandra, okay? For the sake of demonstration purposes, let's be a little realistic. Let's say that you don't hit the Lysandra. It's unlikely. Well, unless your dish is open, you're hitting Lysandra 2 on fucking 4-1. But Ash, Amumu, fine. And then you also need snipers for sure, right? So any sniper can do, we can do something like a Senna. That makes sense to me. It's probably fine. Kog'Maw's fine. Ghostly's fine. It doesn't really matter. But a sniper of any type, right? And let's talk about Sylas. Sylas, what does he need to succeed? Well, in general, he doesn't actually need anything, to be completely honest with you. That's how good this unit is. But the best trait for Sylas to really buff his ability to do well is 4 Bruiser. 2 is great as well, but 4 is where the secret sauce lies, if you will. And knowing what these indicators are and knowing what these traits are to really buff a unit in a specific direction is really important, right? So now we have 4 Bruiser and we have 2 Sniper, 2 Porcelain, right? And this board may seem really janky to you, and if you told me that this level 8 board could win out lobbies, I would tell you you're capping, right? It's not good by any means, but it's still super solid to get you to level 9, and that's the kicker. You have to be able to flex around what you hit, the upgrades that you find that do well in terms of unit quality, right, for your board, for your direction, and that can drive you to 9, and then you can start capping out with the actual meta lines. I will say here real quick that we do have 7 out of 8, so you can actually flex the last one. The big thing to note is that you should know how to be able to fill out these last traits. The most common way to fill out, let's say, a board like this, really depends on just the last unit you hit, right? Let's say, for example, you hit something like an Udyr, right? You're gonna play a fucking Udyr on your board. The unit is very good by itself in vacuum. It's really high unit quality. But Udyr means Ink Shadow is available, and that means your Ink Shadow item, let's say it's the best one for Sylas. It's Force, right? This board is suddenly very, very, very strong. So this is definitely a way you can get the 9, no problem. Even, let's say, for example, though, let's say your Ink Shadow is not that good. Let's say it's not Force. Let's say something like, let's say it's something like, I don't know, Vitality. It's probably the worst one, but honestly, even on Sylas, it's not even that bad, to be honest. But let's say, for example, your Ink Shadow's Vitality, right? And you play a Volley Bear instead. You don't have the Udyr, but you have a Volley Bear instead. Is this really your strongest board? Right, like there are probably better ways to be capping out your board here. You know, maybe a 5 cost hit, maybe you hit like a set and you get Warden and you get Umbral in. That sounds pretty solid to me. That way you can just get a little bit of that extra shielding, a little bit of that extra execute. It seems good enough to get you to 9. That probably seems very, very likely. Altruist as well, it opens up the doors up for something like Rakan, right? Being able to flex around these and run you fine is important, but prioritizing the quality is how you are able to flex around very, very comfortably. Now, obviously, this is nice in this example, but that doesn't mean that this is always going to be the case. So, for example, let's say we just go back to the unit quality page right here, right? Let's say, for example, we do something like Kayn and Kaisa, right? Kayn 2, Kaisa 2, which theoretically, based off what we've been talking about so far, should make sense, right? But this is one of those examples that actually doesn't work. And the reason why is this. You might think it does work, and there's no reason for it to not to, but the problem is that Kaisa needs a lot of things to go right, and more specifically, she really needs 4 trick shot, right? That is the big thing that she needs. And to get 4 trick shot onto your board here, on top of everything else, right? So let's say, for example, you trick shots, so you have the Silver with the Teemo, and usually it's Bard, you don't hit the Xayah on 8, right? Let's say this is your backline and you have a Kayn 2. Well, how can you fit all of this, right? You need some level of a front line to support your backline, because that's what trick shot really needs. It's a very front to back comp. Typically it's Bruisers, but Bruiser doesn't really make too much sense. You could do this, and maybe you can connect it with Yone, and then you get Reaper and Umbral, and then you want Bruisers or something like this. It's a board. It's a board, but the problem is that like your Sylas is gonna go somewhere like fuck off and like do damage. Kane's gonna go fuck off, do damage. Gally's gonna go fuck off and do damage, and then Kaisa's gonna try to do damage. Like, this is an all gas no breaks type of composition, and at the end of the day, it's very expensive for how weak the board is. It's not very competitive. On top of that, you might also notice as well, if you're very astute, you might notice that Xayah would ideally go over Bard, which isn't that, like, you know, difficult of an observation. But I mean, do you really want Xayah on your board if you have a Kayn too? No. You don't. You probably want a Rakan instead, right? That's the big kicker. And if you want a Rakan instead, then whoop-de-doo, look what happens. We have a Rakon on our board, but then if we have a Rakon on our board, why would we ever have, you know, Bruisers on our board? We can drop this as well, and then we're thinking, okay, well, we have Rakon, then we probably want Altruist, so that probably means something like a Soraka. And if we have Soraka, then Heavenly and, you know, Reaper makes more sense, and then if we have something like this, then, you know, why don't we just keep playing more Heavenly units, and then Dragon Lord makes a lot of sense as well with Diana, and then maybe like a Lee Sin, and suddenly, look at what we're playing fucking Heavenly Kayn, right? So you need to be a little careful on the way that you flex your boards. You should look out for those little traps, if you will. But overall, most of the time you should be able to flex as long as you're pretty reasonable with what units that you're trying to 2-star. It obviously requires a little bit of critical thinking, but that's why 4 costs in general are like the top level's favorite type of play, because it's very skill expressive. But anyways, that basically does it for this video. I hope this was helpful. I hope you guys learned a little bit more about the current patch, how to play around it, and how to flex around it. Obviously, there isn't too much that's really changed since the beginning. I wish there was. I wish there was more tech to share with you guys, but unfortunately, this is where we are at. So take care, guys. Happy climbing, and I hope, again, please come by the co-streams and come support and hang out. It'd be an honor. It'd be great to have you guys there. But that's going to do it. Take care, guys, and happy climbing.